There are some searches that never end, not because the person searching gives up, but because giving up would require them to stop believing in something that has kept them going for so long that they can no longer separate the searching from the living. Patricia Webb had been looking for her sister for 30 years, not casually, not in the background. Actively, consistently, with the kind of determined purpose that most people reserve for the most important thing in their lives, because for Patricia, that is exactly what it was. She had filed missing persons inquiries. She had hired a private investigator on 2 separate occasions. She had posted on every platform that existed and had sat with the particular, grinding disappointment of 1,000 leads that dissolved into nothing. She had told herself, on more nights than she could count, that tomorrow might be the day. 30 years of tomorrows, and then a Friday afternoon in Charlotte, North Carolina, on a game show that Patricia had agreed to appear on because her daughter had entered them in a contest without asking, changed everything. What Steve Harvey said to her, 2 words, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, ended 30 years of searching in the span of a breath. And what Patricia Webb did in the seconds that followed was watched by millions of people who had never met her but who understood, in the most instinctive and human way, exactly what they were seeing. Subscribe now and stay with this story to the end, because this one belongs to every person who has ever refused to stop looking for someone they love. Patricia Webb was 56 years old. She had spent 28 years as a social worker in Charlotte, specializing in family reunification, a career choice that, she acknowledged freely in interviews, was not entirely unconnected to her personal history. She had a gift for sitting with families in the most fragile and complicated moments of their relationships and helping them find a way forward. And that gift came, at least in part, from understanding what it felt like to be on the wrong side of a separation with no clear path back. She had grown up as the eldest of 3 children in a household in Winston-Salem that had been, in the early years, warm and ordinary. Her mother worked at the school district. Her father drove long-haul freight. Her younger sister, Denise, was 4 years her junior, a bright, energetic girl who had followed Patricia everywhere with the devoted persistence of a younger sibling who has decided that her older sister is the most interesting person in the world. When Patricia was 14 and Denise was 10, their parents divorced. The details of what followed belong to a family, not to a television script, and will be relayed here only in the terms that Patricia herself has used publicly. The divorce involved a custody arrangement that was, from the beginning, unstable. Denise went with their father. Patricia stayed with their mother. For the first 2 years, there was contact, visits, phone calls, the ordinary navigation of a divided family. Then their father relocated. The visits became less frequent. The phone calls became harder to complete. And then, when Patricia was 17 and Denise was 13, the contact stopped altogether. Patricia had spent the following 3 decades constructing a life that was, by every measure, full and meaningful. She had a daughter named Apalaya, 29, who worked in healthcare administration and who had inherited her mother's a combination of warmth and determination in proportions that made her, as Patricia would tell people, occasionally exhausting to argue with. She had friends, a community, a career that mattered. She had not let the search for Denise hollow out the rest of her life, but she had never stopped. The 2 things had coexisted, a full life and an open wound for 30 years. Denise Porter, as she was now known, was 52 years old. She had spent most of her adult life in Atlanta, Georgia, where she worked as an office manager for a mid-sized architectural firm. She had been married for 19 years to a man named Gerald, and they had 3 children. She had not been missing, in the way that the word missing typically implies. She had been findable, in theory, but the geography of estrangement is not always a matter of physical location. Sometimes it is a matter of not knowing where to look, or looking in the wrong places, or the accumulation of years that makes initiating contact feel increasingly impossible in proportion to how long it has been left undone. Denise had thought about Patricia. She had thought about her mother, who had died 6 years earlier, and about the fact that Patricia had been there, and she had not. She had lived with the specific, unresolvable grief of missing a death that was also a severed connection, of not knowing how to mourn alongside someone you had lost access to before the loss itself occurred. She had told her daughter, in a conversation 2 years before the taping, that she thought about her sister most days and that she did not know how to change that without the courage she had not yet found. It was Denise's daughter, 24-year-old Maya, who had decided that two adults being paralyzed by the same fear was a problem she was in a position to solve, who had called the show. She had done her research, located Patricia through a combination of social media and the family reunification organization that Patricia had spoken for publicly on several occasions, confirmed the connection, and placed the call to the production team within the same afternoon. The producers had moved quickly. Patricia's team for the day was herself, her daughter Apalaya, her sister-in-law Renee, a colleague from her social work practice named Jerome, and her neighbor of 14 years, a retired teacher named Miss Carroll, who had come because Patricia had asked, and because Miss Carroll had long ago decided that Patricia Webb was the kind of person worth showing up for. The Webb team brought a warmth to the stage that was grounded rather than performed. Patricia played with the composed, attentive focus of someone who has spent decades in rooms where paying close attention to what is actually happening is professionally necessary. She answered well. She laughed, genuinely. She drew an early and sustained affection from the audience that had less to do with anything she did, deliberately, and more to do with the quality that her colleagues at work described consistently, the sense that she was actually present with you, rather than simply near you. Steve Harvey made his way to Patricia during the first break with the particular interest he reserved for contestants whose manner suggested a story worth finding. He asked about her work. She described family reunification, social work in 3 sentences that were so clear and so quietly passionate that the audience responded with spontaneous applause, the kind that is not cued and not collective so much, as it is simply what happens when a room full of people recognizes something true. Steve asked how a person comes to that work. Patricia held the question for a moment. She had been asked it before, in professional contexts, and she had a practiced version of the answer that was honest but not fully open. She looked at Steve Harvey and made a decision. She said, "My sister and I were separated when I was 17. I have been looking for her for 30 years. I chose work that kept me close to the idea of finding people." Steve Harvey said, 30 years. Patricia said, 30 years. He said, "You still looking?" She said, without hesitation, "Every day." Steve Harvey held her gaze for a moment. He nodded once, slowly, with an expression that the production floor later described as the expression of a man making a final confirmation of something he had already decided. Then he smiled, not the performance smile, but the cute, Ewitter one that those who watched him closely had come to associate with moments of genuine feeling, and moved on. Adaya, standing off to the side, had her arms crossed tightly across her chest and was studying the floor. The Webb team won the main game with a final round run that drew the audience to its feet and prompted Steve Harvey to briefly abandon the podium and walk the length of the stage in what appeared to be a celebration lap on their behalf. Miss Carroll's performance throughout had been so comprehensively excellent that Steve told her, with complete sincerity, that she was welcome back any time and that he would personally clear space on his calendar. The Fast Money podium was set. Patricia was designated to go first. She stepped up with the measured ease of a woman who has navigated high-stakes moments professionally and personally for decades and is no longer particularly afraid of pressure. Steve Harvey walked toward her. He had a particular quality of stillness about him, a deliberateness in his movement that was different from his usual stage energy, and that Patricia would later say she noticed in real time, without being able to interpret it. He came to stand directly in front of her. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, quietly and without preamble, "Patricia, you told me you have been looking for your sister for 30 years. She said, "Yes." Steve Harvey said, in a voice that was barely above the register of a conversation, "She's here." The two words landed in the studio the way certain sentences land, not loudly, but with a weight that the room felt before it processed. The audience heard them. The cameras caught them, and Patricia Webb stood completely still at the Fast Money podium while her mind did the work of understanding that the thing she had spent 30 years believing might never happen was, in fact, happening right now. She said, "What?" Steve Harvey said it again, the same way, the same tone, without adding anything to it. "She's here." Patricia turned. Denise was standing at the edge of the stage. She was 52 years old, and she was wearing a yellow blouse that her daughter Maya had suggested, because yellow was the color Patricia had always associated with Denise as a child, a detail that Maya had uncovered in a social media post from 3 years earlier, and had filed away for this moment. Denise had not known why Maya had been so insistent about the yellow blouse. She understood now. 30 years. Patricia had last seen this face when it belonged to a 13-year-old girl. She was looking at it now on a 52-year-old woman, and the distance between those two versions of a single person. All the years and experiences and losses and choices that had accumulated in the space between them was visible in a way that was profound rather than devastating. Denise had lived a life, a full one, and she was here. Patricia made a sound that was not a word and crossed the stage. The embrace that followed was not brief. Neither woman moved to end it, and no one in the studio made any gesture toward hurrying them. They held each other with the particular completeness of people who have been waiting long enough that the act of holding on has become something they want to inhabit fully before the moment requires them to move forward. When they finally separated, both of them wiping their faces, the first thing Patricia said was not the rehearsed speech she had imagined on 100 difficult evenings. It was simpler than that. She took her sister's face in both hands and said, "You look like Mama." Denise covered her mouth. After a moment, she said, "I know. I see her every morning." The studio was silent in the particular way it had been in every prior reunion. Collectively, respectfully present, 200 strangers choosing, without coordination, to protect the moment. Steve Harvey had remained at the edge of the stage throughout. When he approached, he moved slowly and he spoke carefully. In the register he used when the moment required him to be a person rather than a host. He said, "I want to say something to both of you, and I want you to hear it because I mean it." He looked at Patricia first. He said, "You chose work that kept you close to the thing you most needed. For 30 years, you helped other families find each other because you could not yet find your own. That is not irony. That is one of the most dignified things I have ever heard." He looked at Denise. He said, "And you came here. That took everything it took, and you did it anyway. That matters more than the 30 years because the 30 years were circumstances. Today was a choice." He paused. He looked at them. He said, "I have been doing this show for a long time. I have tried very hard in that time to be worthy of the moments that happen on this stage. Today I am just grateful that I got to be here for this one." Aralaya, who had maintained her composed stillness throughout the main game, had abandoned it entirely. She was crying quietly at the edge of the stage. Maya, Denise's daughter, the one who had made the call, stood beside her. The two young women, cousins who had never met, were standing next to each other. And at some point during the reunion, without discussion, Maya had put her arm around Alaya's shoulder. Neither of them had planned it. Some things arranged themselves. The fast money round was not completed. The prize was awarded in full, as had become the quiet practice in moments of this kind. Steve Harvey announced it in 2 sentences and returned his full attention to the Webbs, which was where everyone's attention belonged. Patricia and Denise remained in the studio for over 4 hours after the taping. Their daughters, Aralaya and Maya, were present for much of it, occasionally contributing to the conversation, and occasionally leaving the two women alone, with the understanding that some of what needed to be said belonged only to the people who had lived the distance. The conversation covered 30 years in the imperfect, non-linear way that such conversations always do. Not chronologically, not completely, but honestly, which is the only way that matters. Patricia later said that the hardest part of the conversation was also the most important part. The moment when both of them acknowledged that the separation had not been entirely circumstantial, that there had been years on both sides when contact had been possible and had not been made, that fear and pride and the weight of accumulated time had been factors alongside the practical barriers. She said, "We did not leave each other off the hook for everything, and that made the conversation real rather than sentimental. I think that is why it held." Denise said, in the single extended interview she agreed to give, "I had told myself for years that I could not find her. The truth is, I was afraid of what I would find. Afraid she would be angry. Afraid she had moved on. Afraid that the version of a reunion I had imagined would not match reality. What I discovered is that reality was better than the version I had imagined. Not because it was painless, because it was honest." When the episode aired 8 weeks after the taping, the clip of Steve Harvey saying "she's here" became one of the most widely shared segments in the show's digital history. What drew the sharing was not the reunion itself, though the reunion was profoundly moving, but the 4 seconds before it, Steve Harvey's face in the moment, between finishing his sentence and Patricia's comprehension arriving, the expression of a man who knows what he has just put into motion and is watching it unfold with the full weight of what it means. Patricia's professional community responded with particular intensity. Social workers, family therapists, and child welfare advocates across the country shared the clip with the observation that a woman who had spent 28 years helping other families IES find each other had. On a Friday afternoon on a game show, finally been given the same thing she had spent her career providing to others. Several commentators noted the structural symmetry of this with a directness that required no embellishment. The National Alliance for Family Reunification cited the episode in their annual report as an example of the long-term psychological significance of family separation and the importance of accessible reunion support services. Patricia subsequently became an informal advisor to the organization's public outreach efforts, speaking at 3 events in the following year about the intersection of professional and personal experience in family reunification work. Steve Harvey addressed the episode in a reflection shared through his foundation. He wrote about Patricia's description of her career choice, the deliberate positioning of her professional life close to the thing she most needed personally, and said it was the detail that had confirmed, for him, that what the production team was preparing was not only appropriate but necessary. He wrote, "When someone builds their life around a hope they have not been able to fulfill for 30 years, the least you can do if you are in a position to help fulfill it is try." Akalaya and Maya, the daughters who had each, in their own way, driven the reunion without fully knowing each other existed, met twice more in the weeks following the taping before the episode aired. They have since described their relationship as the unexpected gift of the whole experience. Two women in their mid to late 20s who are not quite cousins in the conventional sense but are something close to it, built from a connection that predates both of them and that they are now, deliberately and with full intention, carrying forward. Patricia returned to her social work practice the Monday after the taping. She has said that the experience changed the texture of her professional conversations, without changing their substance. That sitting with families in separation now carried a dimension of personal recognition that it had always theoretically carried, but that felt, after Friday, more immediate and more resolved. She said, "I always believed reunification was possible. Now I have a different relationship with that belief. It is not theoretical anymore." Denise visited Charlotte for the first time 3 months after the taping. She stayed for a week. Patricia took time off work. They visited their mother's grave together, the first time Denise had been to the grave since the burial, and sat with that for a long time in a quiet that was not the silence of estrangement, but its opposite, the silence of two people who have arrived somewhere together and are not yet ready to leave. The yellow blouse became a recurring detail in public discussions of the episode. Maya's decision to have her mother wear it, based on a 3-year-old social media post, filed away against the possibility of a moment that had not yet existed, was cited by several commentators as an example of the kind of deliberate, loving attention to detail that makes the difference between a reunion that is logistically accomplished and one that is emotionally complete. Patricia, when asked about it, said only that child paid attention in a way that changed everything. That is the whole skill of love, really, paying attention. 1 year after the taping, Patricia and Denise took a trip together to Winston-Salem. They walked the street where their childhood home had been. The house was gone, replaced by something newer, which was its own form of information about time, and then drove to the elementary school where Denise had been enrolled when they were last together as children. They stood outside it for a while. Neither of them said very much. On the drive back, Denise told Patricia something she had not told anyone since their mother's death. Patricia listened without interrupting. When Denise Feeney shed, Patricia reached across and held her sister's hand for the rest of the drive. They did not need to speak. 30 years of distance had been replaced, in the space of 12 months, by something quieter and more durable, the ordinary, irreplaceable closeness of two sisters who have found each other again, and intend this time to keep hold. Steve Harvey, in his final reflection on the episode, returned to the moment of the yellow blouse. He wrote, "Maya wanted her mother to walk onto that stage wearing the color that her aunt remembered. That one detail carried 30 years of love in it. That is what I want people to take from this. The reunion happened because young people refused to accept that it could not. They paid attention. They acted. They gave two women who had spent 30 years missing each other back to themselves. If that is not what family is for, I do not know what is. If this story stayed with you, please like this video and subscribe. These are the moments that remind us what we are all searching for. We will see you in the next one."